By attending this presentation, you have signaled your interest in better understanding the events and forces that have shaped modern Jewish life in America. This understanding will be crucial to each of you as you embark on your own journeys to serve and strengthen the Jewish community. While the paths you walk will feature many obstacles, take comfort in knowing that the path has been walked and cleared by American Jews throughout history. It's true that the path would have ended long ago were it not for people such as yourselves who strove to not only honor Judaism, but to keep it evolving in the face of potential threats. Now, no analysis of modern Jewish American life can be properly grounded without a thorough understanding of the events and people that shaped it. So, without further ado, please join me in journeying back to the year 1654, where the story of Jews in America begins. The first Jews came to America in the year 1654. A group of 23 refugees from Brazil fled to the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. For the decades to follow, Jewish settlers followed a typical pattern. They acquired land for a cemetery, worshipped in people's homes, and eventually they would establish their own synagogue. Because of their small numbers and lack of their own religious authority figures, early American Jews relied heavily on the international Jewish community. They looked abroad for Torah scrolls, halakhic guidance, funding, and most importantly, for spouses. Despite their small numbers and minimal observance of Shabbat, festivals, or the laws of kashrut, early American Jews refused to marry non-Jews. In order to avoid intermarriage, their spouses would travel long journeys to meet them in America. In the 1820s, a Charleston congregation planted the seeds for what would eventually become Reform Judaism. In response to dwindling numbers of synagogue attendees, 47 members of this Charleston congregation signed a petition that reformed many of the practices of the synagogue. These reforms include shortening services, adding English sermons, and more. These congregants weren't looking to change any of the fundamental aspects of Judaism. Instead, they wanted to breathe new life into their tradition and ensure that they were fostering a Judaism that younger generations would be drawn to and not pushed away from. For the decades to follow, Jewish settlers would come and establish mostly traditional Orthodox communities. Reform Judaism gains momentum again in the 1880s when an influx of German immigrants came to America. These German Jews brought with them many Reformed Jewish ideologies and practices, from organ music to the use of German during sermons. These Reform ideas spread throughout America, and in 1885, a group of 18 rabbis gathered to agree upon what Reform Judaism truly stood for. Together, they established the Pittsburgh Platform, which laid out the progressive ideologies and practices of the Reform movement. According to Lloyd Gartner, the platform for Reform Judaism sought to create a universal culture of heart and intellect. After 1885, Reform Judaism enters what is referred to as the Classical Reform period, known for its remoteness from Jewish tradition. The Classical Reform period relied heavily on the 8 principles established in the Pittsburgh Platform. It became the source for the Hebrew Union Prayer Book and was comprised of very intelligent and successful individuals, with Kaufman Kohler and Emil Hirsch at the front. At this time, Hebrew Union College becomes decidedly reformed. As American Jewish life reformed, Jewish immigrants flocked to the United States in high numbers. Between 1904 and 1908, 642,000 Jews entered America. The reason that most people emigrated was to escape the hunger and oppression of their home countries. For the people who immigrated to America, the American dream was very real. They had family members and friends who came to the country with nothing and were able to achieve great success. Even more, they knew that in America, Jews were free from oppression. Before 1924, 2.5 million Jews arrived in America. This included an influx of Hasidic Jews in the 1920s who fled the pogroms in Ukraine. Before people emigrated, their rabbis warned them that maintaining traditional religious observance would be difficult in America. This turned out to be true. Immigrant Jewish communities took on a very hometown feel. There wasn't a large amount of money in these communities, and with the added pressures of having to transition to American society, it became very difficult for congregations to last more than one generation. Despite the struggles to maintain the same religious observance that they did in their homeland, America offered 3 distinct forms of Jewish observance. There was Orthodox Judaism for people who understood that life in America was quite different, but emphasized holding on to the traditions and customs of their ancestors before them. Conservative Judaism was a very appealing option for middle-class Jews who wanted to embrace being a modern American with being a traditional Jew. And Reform Judaism offered a thriving community that embraced American modernity and had social justice at its forefront. The Great Depression had a dramatic impact on all denominations. People couldn't afford to pay their dues, and it became incredibly difficult for synagogues to even afford to stay open. However, Jewish life picked up again, and in 1937, the Reform movement established the Columbus Platform. The platform established Jewish people as a source of Judaism and noted the obligation of all Jews to aid in the development of Palestine. Shortly after the platform, American Jews became increasingly aware of the threats facing German and European Jewry under Nazi rule. In response, American Jews started putting their funding and support outwards towards these efforts. When World War II arrived, American Jews gave full support to the war effort. The Holocaust propelled Zionism in a very real way, and in 1942, the Central Conference of American Rabbis endorsed Zionism and the need for a Jewish army in Palestine. The freedom to be Jewish and the growing sense of responsibility to honor Judaism impacted the observance, geography, and daily life of American Jews. Between 1942 to 1955, Orthodoxy in America grew with a wave of 150,000 European immigrants and 100,000 Jewish immigrants from around the world. Ultra-Orthodox Holocaust survivors settled in areas of New York at this time as well. As Sarna explained it, these groups sought to recreate in America what the Nazis had attempted utterly to exterminate. While the Orthodox were growing stronger and more extreme, the rest of American Jews were beginning to intermarry at increasingly high rates, and the gap between those who were very observant to barely observant grew each day. Since the 1940s, Jews started moving to the suburbs. Finding it difficult to sustain a strong religious, cultural, or communal Jewish experience, the 1950s and 60s experienced a major increase in the building of synagogues and religious schools. From 1945 to 1965, over 100,000 synagogues had been built. In the year 1960, 60% of American Jews belonged to a synagogue, compared to only 30% in 1930. Kaplan cited Will Herberg's Protestant Catholic Jew, who explained that the synagogue allowed for religiousness without religion. The synagogue was a way of sociability or belonging, rather than a way of orienting life to God. At this time, conservative synagogues became the perfect fit for those who wanted to maintain tradition, but were unready to adopt Reform observance, and who also felt that orthodoxy was too constraining in this new American society. In the 1960s, American Jews were all about the free love counterculture of the time. The Reform and conservative movements were at the forefront of the civil rights movement and other domestic and international causes in hopes of protecting people who were most vulnerable. Rabbi Joachim Prinz and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel were two individuals who were prominent Jewish figures in the fight for civil rights. Joachim Prinz's speech preceded Martin Luther King's on the March on Washington in 1963. Prinz's speech was and is a reflection of Jewish values that are still at the heart of American Judaism. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was also at the forefront of this work. In Selma, Alabama in 1965, he marched next to Martin Luther King and 600 others in the fight for Black Americans to receive the right to vote. Heschel's words, "I felt my legs were praying," are still quoted today. While these actions were admirable, the question regularly arose as to whether American Jews had done enough to help protect European Jews during the Holocaust. In 1967, an event happened that would force American Jews to reconsider their place in America and in the world. In 1967, the Six-Day War broke out in Israel's fight for survival. Over the span of 6 days, Israeli armies fought for control over the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and Jerusalem. For many Jews, this was a miracle. According to Sarna, Jews across the world flocked to synagogues in relief and thanks. Together, they raised and donated over $430 million to aid Israel. Adjusted for inflation, that would come out to $3,222,046,200 today. After the Six-Day War, there was a collective shift in American Jewish ideals. They shifted from universalistic causes to particularistic, focusing their efforts now on uniquely Jewish efforts such as Israel. After the scare of 1967, Charles Lieberman argued that ambivalent American Jews were torn between integration and acceptance into American society, and Jewish group survival. Jews at this time were given the freedom of choice to live their Jewish lives in a way that felt most meaningful to them. For the first time, their Jewishness was a matter of personal faith rather than fate. At the same time, they bore the reality of carrying on the story of their parents and the generation before them who experienced the Holocaust. Now that we know some of the history of American Judaism, let's take a look at American Judaism today. Philanthropic causes were at the heart of American Judaism since the first Jews came to America. Daniel Elazar recalls how early Jews made consistent efforts to help fellow Jews in America and abroad. After the Six-Day War, Jews continued to be incredibly invested in aiding Jewish causes. This philanthropy continues into today and breaks into 5 main spheres. We have the religious congregational sphere, the education cultural sphere, the community relations and defense sphere, the communal welfare sphere, and the Israel overseas sphere. Many Jewish philanthropic organizations have become household names, including the Jewish United Fund, Jewish Council for Urban Affairs, and Jewish Cultural Centers, to just name a few. Philanthropy is a key value for all demographics of American Jews, so let's take a look at what these demographics actually look like. Counting Jews and knowing who they were, where they were, and what they were doing has been a long-standing American tradition. Jews have been deeply concerned with the idea of being the last generation, so they always wanted to know if the numbers supported or refuted these concerns. Since the 1970s, we've had numerous surveys that give a glimpse into American Jewish demographics. In 2013, the Pew Research Center surveyed American Jews. The goal of their survey was to see the intersection of religion and public affairs, and also to gain information about Jewish takes on topics that typically had religious components, such as same-sex marriage, abortion, and the like. Their findings give us a portrait of trends and demographics of American Jews and Judaism today. So, when it comes to geography, 43% of American Jews live in the Northeast, roughly a quarter of Jews reside in the South, and a quarter in the West, while 11% live in the Midwest. Jews are divided pretty much half and half between urban and suburban areas, with only 4% living in rural areas. In terms of age, the older you are, the more likely you are to identify as a Jew by religion. The seeds of Reform Judaism planted in the 1800s blossomed through time, with 35% of Americans today considering themselves to be Reform Jews. The next largest are 30% of Jews who claim to be not observant at all, followed by conservative and then Orthodox. If you're talking politics with a Jew, there's a 3-to-1 chance that you're talking to a Democrat. Israel has been and continues to be a topic that raises great passion and controversy, even amongst Jews. According to the Pew study, in America, 4 in 10 Jews believe Israel was given to the Jewish people by God, a belief that is held by roughly 8 in 10 Orthodox Jews. 6 in 10 U.S. Jews are, quote, optimistic that a way can be found for Israel and an independent Palestinian state to coexist peacefully, even though about half do not think the current Israeli government is making a sincere effort to bring about peace. Age plays a major factor in how Americans view Israel. People who responded to this survey who were under the age of 45 were much less likely to feel connected to Israel, but they were no less likely to regard Israel as important to their Jewish identities. Young people's detachment from Israel wasn't going unnoticed. The program Birthright Israel was established in 1998 to give as many young people as possible the experience of living in Israel. The 5 principles of the program had a major impact on the Jewish community. With the people who first participated in the program now being adults, the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies was able to survey the long-term impact of trips like Birthright. They found that overall, people who participated in Birthright were more likely to give money to Jewish organizations, and they were also more engaged, with Jewish participants more likely to have participated in a special Shabbat or gone to services if they had gone to Birthright. While programs like Birthright were helping, the numbers still showed that younger generations were distancing themselves from Israel. Many studies cited intermarriage as a potential reason for young people distancing themselves. Stephen Cohen and R.A. Kelman stated that intermarriage is both a symptom and a cause of this reformulation of Jewish identities, in a direction that makes attachment to Israel specifically and identification with collective loyalties generally less intuitively obvious. In their research, they found that intermarried couples were far less attached to Israel than couples where both partners were Jewish. Views of intermarriage have shifted over time. While early American Jews clung to the value of marrying other Jews, this value has dwindled throughout the years. Now we see intermarriage having a dramatic impact on American Jews and on American Judaism. According to the Pew study, 54% of married Jews were married to other Jews, and 44% of married Jews were married to non-Jews. Before 1970, the number of intermarried couples was only 17%. People attribute a number of factors to the rise in intermarriage, from Jewish people's increased assimilation to decreased conversions as a result of the Reform movement no longer requiring the mother to be Jewish. Intermarriage has and is having a major impact on many aspects of American Jewish life. Andrew Apostolou states that most intermarried couples do not raise their offspring as Jews, and surprisingly, these children themselves marry non-Jews at a rate of 76%. In her research on Jewish enrichment in Chicago, Leslie Rosenstern shares the number of interfaith families raising their children grew 11% in one decade, with 49% of interfaith families raising their children as Jewish. Despite the large number of interfaith families and communities and their demonstrated dedication to Judaism, many synagogues are not creating inclusive spaces for these families. Through her research on the independent B'nai Mitzvah experience, Abigail Pikus reveals what happens when inclusive spaces are not made for interfaith families. She explains that in situations where interfaith families have been ignored or degraded, they have left Judaism altogether. The Pew study found similar trends. They noted that approximately 1/4 of people who are raised Orthodox have since become conservative or Reform Jews, while 30% of those raised conservative have become Reform, and 28% of those raised Reform have left the ranks of Jews by religion entirely. This reflects a problem that Apostolou foresees being the unfortunate reality of American Judaism. The numbers of Reform and conservative synagogues are declining. He states that without Reform and conservative Judaism, the options will be Orthodoxy or other religions. Leslie Rosenstern's research supports Apostolou's conclusion as well. In her findings, non-Orthodox parents are increasingly less likely to choose traditional synagogue-based models for engagement and affiliation if they or their spouse are not Jewish. So, what does all this mean for American Judaism today? In a primer on the American Jewish community, Jerome Chains offers two ways of looking at the challenges facing American Judaism. One viewpoint is that we lean in and accept that intermarriage, assimilation, low fertility rates, and prolonged singlehood in the Jewish community are a reality. Therefore, it would be best for the Jewish world to accept this and provide the spaces and programming necessary to keep this new generation, quote, in the fold. The other viewpoint argues that Jewish organizations should do whatever possible to counteract these trends. Well, intermarriage doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, and more Jews are eager for what one rabbi refers to as the Starbucks experience when it comes to Jewish lives. This cultural shift has forced synagogues and organizations to rethink how they provide Jewish experiences. It has opened the door for creativity and innovation. This need for fresh Jewish experiences opened the door for organizations like One Table, Upstart, and Mishkan to flourish. We now have what are referred to as emergent Jewish communities. Examples include Boston's Moshe House, independent minions, community centers, and more. According to the 2007 National Spiritual Community Survey, we have organizations who stress living out Jewish values in the non-Jewish world. They fill the void that many Jews are experiencing by offering mission-based institutions, rabbis who show morality by example, not prescription, and offer spirituality through music and service. This is a great time to be a Jew in your 20s and 30s. Millennial Jewish leaders have benefited greatly from the institutions founded by generations before them. After 1967, Jews were very invested in what Jack Wertheimer refers to as protective causes. Young Jews today are returning to the trends of Jews in the early 60s. They are much more interested in putting their time and money towards progressive causes like social action and equity. They are also very invested in expressive causes that allow for connection and meaning. Young Jewish leaders have already had a positive impact and are helping the Jewish community to expand beyond the status quo. And now our journey concludes. Now understanding where we've been and where we are, it is up to you to continue to shape the path of where we are going. From 1654 to today, Jews have proven to be dynamic, creative, and adaptive people. Regardless of the challenges of the time, Jews have proved over and over again that they will survive, thrive, and set the foundation for the next generation of Jews to flourish. Today is no different, and American Judaism still faces challenges of its own. But, as time has shown, and as leaders like yourself demonstrate, American Jews and American Judaism will adapt with passion and commitment.